My name is Veronica. I'm sitting at my dining table, still reeling from the events of last night. My biological parents, whom I hadn't seen in years, were just here. They came with fake smiles, expensive flowers, and a bottle of wine, acting as if they'd always loved me. But when they saw the people who truly raised me, their faces dropped in a way I'll never forget. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was born into a family that seemed perfect on the surface. My parents, Victor and Isabella Thompson, lived in a large mansion in Beverly Hills. My father was the CEO of Thompson Talent Academy, a prestigious institution that groomed young prodigies for success in various fields. My mother was a well-known socialite and educational consultant, always ready to evaluate a child's potential at a glance. I had a twin sister named Victoria. She was the apple of my parents' eyes. From a young age, she showed extraordinary talent in mathematics and music. She could play the piano like a virtuoso and solve complex math problems in her head. At school events, my parents would proudly introduce her, and everyone would praise her as a genius. I, on the other hand, was different. I loved to draw and tell stories. During tests, I would freeze up. Numbers would dance in front of my eyes, and my hands would shake with nervousness. While Victoria filled her notebooks with perfect answers, I filled mine with little drawings and stories I made up in my head. My father would scold me, saying I was wasting paper, and my mother would tell me to face reality. At dinner, they never asked me what made me happy. Instead, they grilled me about my grades and compared me to Victoria. If Victoria got an A, they would celebrate. If I got a B, they would look disappointed. One day, my father tapped my report card and said, "Average is the enemy of success. You need to step up." My mother added, "Your sister is carrying the Thompson name high. You're dragging it down." When I was 12, my parents decided to prepare us for an entrance exam to an exclusive private school for gifted children. They told everyone that their twin daughters were both applying, showing off brochures from their academy. Behind closed doors, I would cry over practice tests until the paper was soaked. My father called my crying manipulation, and my mother said I would be to blame if I embarrassed them. Victoria passed the exam with flying colors, but I failed miserably. The school's admissions director gently suggested that I might benefit from a different learning environment, one with more emotional support. My parents didn't hear the support part. They only heard failure. 2 days of silence filled our house. Then, one night after dinner, my mother told me to pack a small bag because they had found a place for me. I naively thought it was some kind of tutoring. The next morning, they drove me to a children's home on the outskirts of the city called Sunshine Haven. As I watched my parents sign papers at the front desk, I knew my life was about to change. My father told the staff that I was rebellious and hard to manage, and my mother said they had tried everything. I stood there, with my backpack hugged tightly to my chest, trying to explain that I was just scared. But no one listened. Victoria was not allowed to come inside. I saw her pale, tear-streaked face through the car window, one hand pressed against the glass. I ran after the car as they drove away, screaming for my mother. But she didn't turn around. My father rolled down the window and said, "Your sister has a bright future. You need people who can handle you." For the first few weeks at Sunshine Haven, I slept with my shoes on, hoping they would come back for me. I wrote letters every day, apologizing for my grades and promising to be better. But the letters came back unopened, with a big red stamp across the envelope. I realized then that I had been discarded so that the Thompson family could maintain their perfect image. Sunshine Haven was a lonely place. There were other kids who had lost their parents or had difficult home situations. I stopped telling people my last name because the Thompsons were well known in the area. Some of the staff members were confused when they learned who my parents were. They couldn't understand how people who claimed to know so much about children could abandon their own. I waited for my parents to call, then for Victoria. But the calls never came. Months later, Victoria managed to send me a birthday card through a school counselor. It had a drawing of 2 stars and the words, "I'm still your twin." I folded that card until it was almost falling apart. It was the only proof that someone from my old life remembered me. My parents were invited to meetings about my possible return home. They missed the first one because of a business conference, and the second because Victoria had a performance. By the third meeting, their email was cold and short, saying that I was better off in specialized care. I became quieter and stopped asking when I could go home. I still wrote stories, but I hid them under my mattress, thinking that my creativity was something to be ashamed of. Then, one sunny afternoon, a woman named Mrs. Green came to Sunshine Haven. She was a volunteer with a reading program for the kids. She noticed the corner of my notebook sticking out from under my sleeve. Instead of scolding me, she asked, "Do you write stories?" I shrugged, and she smiled and said, "When you're ready, I'd be honored to read one." No adult had ever used the word honored about something I'd made. The next week, she came back with her husband, Mr. Green. He was a mechanic with rough hands and kind eyes. He noticed the broken cassette recorder in the activity room and fixed it right in front of us. Then he gave it to me and said, "Writers need tools too." I started using the recorder to speak my stories, and for the first time, the words flowed freely. Mrs. Green listened to every tape and asked me about my characters and endings. Mr. Green built me a wooden box to keep the tapes safe. After a few months, they asked if they could become my foster parents. I couldn't believe it at first. People came and went at Sunshine Haven all the time. But they were persistent. There were background checks, home visits, and court dates. My parents were notified, and my father sent an email saying he trusted the system to make the best decision. My mother didn't even bother to write. I moved in with the Greens in the summer. Their house was small, with bookshelves overflowing and a backyard filled with old bikes that Mr. Green was fixing. At dinner, they asked me about my day, what made me laugh, and if I wanted seconds. When I brought home a B+ on my report card, Mrs. Green put it on the fridge and said, "You're making great progress." I stared at that fridge for a long time, trying not to cry. Eventually, my biological parents terminated their parental rights through lawyers, without a single personal letter to me. On the day the adoption became final, the Greens offered to give me a new name. I chose Green because I wanted to belong to the family that had truly cared for me. As I grew up, I carried the scars of my past. When a teacher handed back a test, I could still hear my father's voice telling me that average was a failure. But I also had the support of the Greens. They taught me that everyone learns differently and that my creativity was a gift. In high school, I joined the school radio club. I started recording stories for younger kids at the local library. I made the stories interactive, with sound effects and activities. I watched as kids who hated reading became engaged and excited about learning. I went to college in New York to study education and child psychology. I wasn't the top student in every class, but I was the one who could explain complex ideas in a way that made sense to others. During college, I reconnected with Victoria. She apologized over and over for not being able to stop what happened. I told her it wasn't her fault, the blame lay with our parents. She was struggling too, under the weight of our parents' expectations. I also met my husband, Daniel, a fellow student who was studying special education. He understood my past and supported me in my work. After graduation, we got married in a small ceremony at the Greens' backyard. Victoria came, and she cried throughout the vows. Daniel and I moved to San Francisco, where I started a program called Bright Horizons Learning. We used public library rooms and donated equipment to help children who had been labeled as slow or difficult. The program grew quickly. A little boy with dyslexia read his first full paragraph into a microphone and asked to send the recording to his grandmother. His mother was so overjoyed that she couldn't stop crying. Our success caught the attention of the media. I was invited to a national television program to receive an Education Innovation Award. On the show, I said, I was once told I was not worth investing in. But 2 people taught me that every child is unique and deserves love and support. The camera panned to the Greens in the audience. Mrs. Green was crying, and Mr. Green was trying to hold back his tears. Daniel held my hand tightly. 3 days after the broadcast, I received a message from my biological parents. They said they had seen me on TV, that I looked beautiful, and that they were proud of me. They wanted to reconnect as a family. I read the message twice, waiting for an apology, but it never came. I called Victoria, and she told me the truth. Thompson Talent Academy was facing a crisis. Parents were complaining about the high-pressure environment, and a former student had written an article about burnout. My parents saw me as a way to repair their public image. I decided to invite them to dinner. I told them I wanted to introduce them to my real family. I gathered all the evidence of my journey, including the first notebook Mrs. Green gave me and the cassette recorder Mr. Green fixed. Daniel put together a video of our Bright Horizons workshops. On the night of the dinner, my parents arrived with their fake smiles. My father looked around my home and said, "You've done well for yourself." I thought, for myself? They had nothing to do with it. When they saw Victoria and the Greens at the table, their expressions changed. My mother complimented the table and the food, trying to avoid the past. My father asked about Bright Horizons as if it were a business opportunity. Halfway through dinner, my mother touched my wrist and said, "We've missed so much. It's time to heal. The world should know your full story." I asked, "Which full story?" My father started talking about family expectations and resilience. I stood up and said, "Success does begin with a foundation. And I want to honor the people who actually saved my life." I turned to the Greens and told the story of how they had found me at Sunshine Haven and believed in me. My father's face hardened, and my mother looked shocked when she recognized the Greens. Years ago, at an educational event, Mrs. Green had challenged my mother's views on gifted education. My mother had laughed at her then, but now, she was the one who had truly raised me. I opened a folder and placed an email on the table, the one where my father had said Victoria was the child worth investing in. My parents' faces went pale. Daniel played the video, showing the kids at Bright Horizons learning and growing. My mother started to cry, but her first words were, "Do you know what this could do to us?" I looked at her and said, "That's the first honest thing you've said tonight." They left before dessert, angry and embarrassed. The next morning, they posted a statement on the Academy's official page, trying to spin the story in their favor. But I wasn't going to let them. I wrote a calm and factual response, sharing the truth about my past and how the Greens had saved me. Victoria also shared her own statement, saying that she had been trapped by our parents' expectations and that silence had protected them for too long. The response was overwhelming. Parents who had sent their kids to Thompson Talent Academy started asking questions, and sponsors withdrew their support. My father messaged me, saying I had damaged the family name. My mother said she hoped I was satisfied. I replied, "I hope one day you understand that children are not investments. They are people." Then I blocked them. Bright Horizons received more support after the truth came out. Daniel, the Greens, Victoria, and I started a fund called Every Child is Special to support more children who needed help. At our first fundraiser, Mr. Green wore his old work jacket, and he said, "We didn't raise a genius. We raised a child, and that's enough." Looking back, I realized that my revenge was not to destroy my biological parents. It was to build a life that they could never rewrite, a life filled with love, support, and purpose.